This is the JWN podcast. Welcome to another solo show. It's not going to be quite a solo show. I'm going to make a phone call. I got a story to tell because it's like a dark, stormy night here, and I feel like I'm kind of in a storytelling mood. So the other day, I dropped something underneath my desk in my home office, and I went to go pick it up, and I found this book sitting under, there's a stack of books sitting next to my desk, and I just haven't picked it up in a while. It was by an author called Richard Brautigan, and back when I was in a band, there was a song, the last song on the last record we put out, called Campsite 54, and the song was an homage to Richard Brautigan. He has a book called Trout Fishing in America. And I was going to tell you a little bit about Richard Brautigan. I still might tell you a little bit about Richard Brautigan. But what's the funnier part of how I came to know who Richard Brautigan is. How I came across his work. So let's make a phone call. Let's call my buddy Tömmy Rockstar, who was in the band with me at the time, and I'm gonna share the story with him. So let's give me a second. Let me making phone call.
Hey, what's up, man?
Tömmy Rockstar.
How are you, dude?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Good. I'm hanging in there. I'm upstate New York, just chilling. Are we on right now? Are you? Recording?
Yeah, we're on. You're in the chalet?
No, I'm actually in our. We have another home we bought in Harriman, just north of New York, and so I've been with my wife for the last couple of weeks, and I'm going up to the chalet on the weekend, living up there for a month, and we'll see how it goes.
The rock star life.
Yeah, country mountain man life.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, to set it up, I don't know if you remember how I came across the author Richard Brautigan.
No, but I do remember that you had affinity with him and his work, so refresh me.
Okay, so this was, I had to have been maybe 16 or 17 years old. I was working for this quote-unquote charity called Good Cause Marketing out in Long Island.
Yeah.
Do you remember this?
Yeah,
do you remember
I do.
this time in my life?
Yeah.
So basically what this thing was, this company would go around to local businesses and they'd get these, they'd create coupons. They'd go up to like the local pizzeria and be like, hey, we're going to do a charity fundraiser. Will you give us a coupon to put in our coupon book that we can use to raise money? And maybe like they'll go to Vincent's and say, hey, give us $5 off like, a Supreme pie. And they'd get all different restaurants to put these coupons in there. And then people like me who worked for the charity would walk around door to door, knocking on random people's doors, asking them if they would give us $20 for this coupon book. And, we had a whole spiel. It was, in retrospect, it was pretty shady. I don't know. We went to this place in like Franklin Square, this storefront. It had this big open room that we'd meet every morning and do like chants and stuff. It almost felt like you were going into like a cult meeting.
Chants?
Yeah, like real salesy type stuff to try to motivate you. It was gross. Yeah. It was gross. We'd have little crews of people that would go to different towns and knock on doors all day. It was brutal. It was brutal. Yeah. But there was this time while I was there, this is towards the end of my tenure there, which wasn't long. I don't even remember exactly how long, but it couldn't have been more than like 4 or 5 months. Mm-hmm. They were opening an office in New Jersey. So they had this guy who worked for them that he got to a level where he got to get his own office to manage because everything's like, promotion. If you sell this many coupon books, you can consistently, you'll get promoted to district manager and office manager and all this kind of stuff. So there was 2 of us that went, and I'm going to change some names just because honestly, I don't want to I don't want to dime anyone out.
Yep.
So it was me and this other guy, and he was a Latino kid. He was really cool. His name was Eddie. And so me and him were going to Jersey together for a week from like Monday to Friday. So we get there. This guy who was running the office, he looked like Shooter McGavin kind of, but like a younger version from Happy Gilmore.
Yep.
Okay. So he looked like a younger version of that dude. But he was a handsome guy, and he had like really kind of beaming eyes. Like when he looked and talked to you, he kind of like was hypnotize you.
Mm-hmm.
He was very like imposing as a person.
Right. So, charismatic.
Yeah. So the first day we go there, we meet up at his office. The office is like empty. It's even more barren than the place in New York. It's kind of like a joke. And he's like, all right, we'll get right to work. So we're walking around Jersey, and this guy would sell these books. Like, I swear, I couldn't figure out what his game was. He would walk up to random people in parking lots, and mostly women, and he'd get like real, like uncomfortably close, like felony close in COVID times. And they would just be like charmed by him, and they'd give him $20 and he'd sell books. And we're sitting there, me and Eddie are looking at each other like, oh shit, man, what the hell's going on here? So we get to his place that first night, and his apartment is empty. Like, he had somebody drop off a couch for one of us to sleep on, and then he had another spare bedroom that had just a mattress on the floor. It was really weird. The only room that had any furniture in it was his own bedroom. And even then, it was just a bed and like a dresser. So we're like, okay, this is weird. He's like, yeah. No, I just moved in here. So I haven't gotten any furniture yet. I'm like, okay, it makes sense, I guess. I didn't think much of it. And then that night we go out to dinner, and I meet this lady that was a friend of his. And her name was, we'll just call her Patricia.
Mm-hmm.
And she kind of had a very like Wiccan type feel to her, kind of witchy. She was really sweet and nice, but she also had this kind of dark mystique.
Got it.
And, I was like 16, 17 years old. I was young.
Right.
And, she was probably not even 30 yet, but she felt like, she might as well when you're that age, like a woman that old feels like a senior citizen. But anyway, she was really cool. We hung out that night. We had dinner and whatnot. And then we went through the week, and, things just were weird. This guy, his name was, we'll call him Troy, the manager, because that sounds like the type of name that it puts a picture in your head.
Yeah.
So at night, during the day it was fine. Everything was great. But at night, Troy would go in his room, just close the door, and then random people would come by and go in his room. Like dudes, girls, whatever. Like a couple of people a night would just go in there and disappear. And we were sitting on the couch. There was no TV either. So we were just sitting on the couch, like talking, like, all right, this is weird. It's very uncomfortable. And this guy, he started getting, like, this other guy was maybe a year or two older than me that I was with. And he started getting a little suspicious. He's like, something's going on here, man. Something's weird. Something's real freaking weird. So he comes up with some excuse and he just bails. He leaves. He's like, my mom's calling me. Whatever it was. It comes up with some stupid excuse. Right. And now I'm stuck alone in this situation. I'm like, I don't know what to do. So we get to Thursday night, and somehow I got pawned off with he's like, I got to go do something. But my friend that you met the other night, Patricia, she's going to hang out with you. Okay.
Yeah.
So I go to this girl, Patricia's house. She's divorced. She has this beautiful house, by the way, in North Jersey. And she's the only one, by the way, out of all of us that had a car. Like this dude the manager guy, no car. Me and Eddie showed up on a train.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? It was it was weird. So I go into this lady's house. We're hanging out, and she's like, oh, you want to smoke some weed? And I'm like, yeah, of course. And then she's playing records and stuff, and she's got she's playing like The Doors and Pink Floyd and shit like that. And then she's like, we're just talking, hanging out. We're having a really good time. And then she brings out this little tin and she's like, hey, you want to do some mushrooms? And I was like, okay. Meanwhile, this lady's almost twice my age.
Wow.
So I take some caps and some stems, and then she looks at me and she's like, you just took a lot. And I was like, well, all right. Because we had probably done mushrooms a couple of times before, and I was like, okay. She's like, this is real potent shit. I'm like, okay. So I'm like, whatever. You know, she's just thinking I'm a lightweight. Dude, in like an hour, I'm like melting into her couch. I can't move. I'm like staring at her ceiling, and we're in the basement of her house, like, or the ground floor, which was kind of like probably like a split level type of thing, but it was the ground floor. And I'm staring at her ceiling, and it was just moving. You know what happens.
Yep.
You know the whole deal.
Yep.
And she's sitting there across from me, talking to me. And as she's talking to me, there's like sparks flying out of her mouth and coming out of her eyes.
Wow.
And I'm just like, what the fuck? She's like, hey, did you ever hear of this guy, Richard Brautigan? I'm like, no. Why would I? So she brings out this book, Trout Fishing in America. And she starts like reading some passages from it. And I'm just like, if you read the book by itself, it's so weird. It's so out there. It's extremely strange stuff. As you would know, we put one of his poems in the liner notes to our second album in Boys Rock. You remember that?
Yes. Oh, of course. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So, and it's
something about a man in a hat and a taxi cab.
With his hat on, he's about 5 inches taller than a taxi cab.
Yeah.
And so I'm tripping, and she's reading
Yeah.
out of this book to me, and I'm freaking out because she had this very thick purple carpet. It was like shag carpet, and it looked like it was growing and waving, like, and the carpet itself was kind of wrapping around my feet and holding me in place. And everything's moving. Like she's wearing this flowy black coverall over her white tank top. And it looks like it's blowing in the breeze, and her hair is just kind of waving. And she had like a couple of streaks of grays, but not a lot. Just like the beginnings of like, oh, you know, you're starting to show your age. And of course, in the mind of a 16-year-old, you're thinking, oh, this lady is seeing some shit. Yeah. The smell in the place it wasn't foul, but there was a slight dampness, probably because we were on the ground floor, and she was burning incense. So you kind of just got this like real, you know, almost like you're in a dive bar in New Orleans type of vibe to the place. Just kind of that mystical feel, that the dampness, but just enough, not where it was uncomfortable, but enough where, you know, you kind of had this feeling of warmth, of a presence that's grabbing you. And she had this voice that was extremely calming. Like she talked with a very low, sexy tone. She was motherly. She definitely sounded like somebody who really cared about people. And she would talk about Troy like, oh, he's my little project. She's taking care of him. Well, yeah. We'll find out a little bit more about Troy later on. When I tell you, nothing like inappropriate happened that night except for the drugging me and then making me sleep in her bed, which I did not sleep at all. There was nothing sexual that happened. I have to insist there was nothing sexual that happened, nothing inappropriate on that level, except for the drugs and the rock and roll and the weird poetry and whatnot. So when it's time to wake up the next morning, and mind you, I have not slept a wink. My eyes were open, wide eyed the whole night long. And I wake, it's time to get up and get ready to go. She drives me to the train station, and she gives me a copy of Trout Fishing in America to read on the train. She gives me her copy. And that's how I got turned on to the book. So when I get back into the office that Friday, I got there early. I got there early enough that we went to work, and I really did nothing because I hadn't slept and I was still coming down off of all of the mushrooms. Eddie grabs me and he's like, dude, you'll never fucking believe what was going on in that apartment. And I'm like, all right, hit me up. Let me tell you what was going on. But he tells me that the guy was a total heroin addict. The people coming over were either dealers or people doing heroin with him. And he had a history of this, and Eddie quit that day. He's like, I just want you to know I'm leaving because this is the fact that they sent me into this like drug den is so screwed up. But I wanted to stay around to tell you. And yeah, I didn't last long after that. I've probably stayed a little bit longer after that and trying to wrap my head around what happened there. And so fast forward to, I guess, when did we write that song? That song was in
1997, 98.
Yeah, it was one of the last songs that we wrote.
Yes, wrote and recorded.
And it has a very different feel from the rest of the record too. It was kind of like our Rocket clone.
Yeah. I would agree. Oh, sure.
And it's still one of my favorites. It's just out there.
Yeah.
It's a weird song, and there are lines in the song which are taken straight out of a chapter in that book, like word for word. There's lines that come right out of it,
right,
and then it's trying to put it into its own narrative as well.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So that's how I found out about Richard Brautigan, and I don't think he was ever a huge mainstream. He was like 50s, 60s beatnik type of guy, but he wrote the book. He was traveling around with his wife. He was traveling around. He left San Francisco, and he drove around with his wife right after they got married. To like Montana and places like that. And they went fishing, and they would camp.
Right.
And he would run into random people, and just every chapter of that book was based on something that had happened during that trip. But it's, they were out of their minds. They were, But that's how I found out about Richard Brautigan, and that's where that song came to be.
That's a great song, and I think after this, I'm gonna have to go look it up and listen to
it. So I wanted to read you an excerpt from Trout Fishing in America, so you could kind of get a handle on just the kind of writing that I was kind of enamored with. And it really ties back to that experience in a very strange situation for a teenage boy to find himself in a different state with a woman nearly twice his age in an altered state of mind as well. So here's a chapter that kind of, it stuck out for me. This is called A Note on the Camping Craze That Is Currently Sweeping America. As much as anything else, the Coleman Lantern is the symbol of the camping craze that is currently sweeping America, with its unholy white light burning in the forests of America. Last summer, a Mr. Norris was drinking at a bar in San Francisco. It was Sunday night, and he had 6 or 7. Turning to the guy On the next stool, he said, "What are you up to?" "Just having a few," the guy said. "That's what I'm doing," Mr. Norris said. "I like it." "I know what you mean," the guy said. "I had to lay off for a couple of years. I'm just starting up again." "What was wrong?" Mr. Norris said. "I had a hole in my liver," the guy said. "In your liver?" "Yeah. The doctor said it was big enough to wave a flag in. It's better now. I can have a couple once in a while. I'm not supposed to, but it won't kill me." "Well, I'm 32 years old," Mr. Norris said. "I've had 3 wives, and I can't remember the names of my children." The guy on the next stool, like a bird on the next island, took a sip from his scotch and soda. The guy liked the sound of alcohol in his drink. He put the glass back on the bar. "That's no problem," he said to Mr. Norris. "The best thing I know for remembering the names of children from previous marriages is to go out camping. Try a little trout fishing. Trout fishing is one of the best things in the world for remembering children's names." "That right?" Mr. Norris said. "Yeah," the guy said. "That sounds like an idea," Mr. Norris said. "I've got to do something. Sometimes I think one of them is named Carl. But that's impossible. My ex hated the name Carl." "You try some camping and that trout fishing," the guy on the next stool said, "and you'll remember the names of your unborn children." "Carl! Carl! Your mother wants you," Mr. Norris yelled with a kind of a joke. Then he realized that it wasn't very funny. He was getting there. He'd have a couple more, and then his head would always fall forward and hit the bar like a gunshot. He'd always miss the glass so he wouldn't cut his face. His head would always jump up and look startled around the bar, people staring at it. He'd get up then and take it home. The next morning, Mr. Norris went down to a sporting goods store and charged his equipment. He charged a 9x9-foot dry finished tent and an aluminum center pole. Then he charged an Arctic sleeping bag filled with the eider down and an air mattress and an air pillow to go with the sleeping bag. He also charged an air alarm clock to go along with the idea of night and waking in the morning. He charged a 2-burner Coleman stove and a Coleman lantern and a folding aluminum table and a big set of interlocking aluminum cookware and a portable icebox. The last thing he charged were his fishing tackle and a bottle of insect repellent. He left the next day for the mountains. Hours later, he arrived in the mountains. The first 16 campgrounds he stopped at were filled with people. He was a little surprised. He had no idea the mountains would be so crowded. At the 17th campground, a man just died of a heart attack, and the ambulance attendants were taking down his tent. They lowered the center pole and then pulled up the corner stakes. They folded the tent neatly and put it in the back of the ambulance, right beside the man's body. They drove off down the road, leaving behind them in the air a cloud of brilliant white dust. The dust looked like the light from a Coleman lantern. Mr. Norris pitched his tent right there and set up all his equipment and soon had it all going at once. After he finished eating a dehydrated beef stroganoff dinner, he turned off all of his equipment with the master air switch and went to sleep, because now it was dark. It was about midnight when they brought the body and placed it beside the tent, less than a foot away from where Mr. Norris was sleeping in his Arctic sleeping bag. He was awakened when they brought the body. They weren't exactly the quietest body bringers in the world. Mr. Norris could see the bulge of the body against the side of the tent. The only thing that separated him from the dead body was a thin layer of 6-ounce water-resistant and mildew-resistant dry finish green Ameriflex poplin. Mr. Norris unzipped his sleeping bag and went outside with a gigantic hound-like flashlight. He saw the body bringers walking down the path towards the creek. "Hey, you guys," Mr. Norris shouted. "Come back here. You forgot something." "What do you mean?" one of them said. They both looked very sheepish, caught in the teeth of the flashlight. "You know what I mean," Mr. Norris said. "Right now." The body bringers shrugged their shoulders, looked at each other, and then reluctantly went back, dragging their feet like children all the way. They picked up the body. It was heavy, and one of them had trouble getting hold of the feet. That one said, kind of hopelessly to Mr. Norris. You won't change your mind? Good night and goodbye, Mr. Norris said. They went off down the path toward the creek, carrying the body between them. Mr. Norris turned his flashlight off, and he could hear them stumbling along the rocks along the bank of the creek. He could hear them swearing at each other. He heard one of them say, "Hold your end up." Then he couldn't hear anything. About 10 minutes later, he saw all sorts of lights go on at another campsite along the creek. He heard a distant voice shouting, "The answer is no. You already woke up the kids. They have to have their rest. We're going on a 4-mile hike tomorrow up to Fishconk Lake. Try someplace else." The beauty of this story is when you find the seeds of inspiration, how you got to a point where you're putting something out in the world and you kind of dig until you find the roots and eventually the seed of where this idea or where this inspiration came from. And that's kind of the beauty of creativity, because sometimes you don't know. A lot of times you'll create something and you don't know where that seed was planted. It happened in such a weird way that you just know it's in you. And you create something that you feel and it's 100% pure to you. This is one of those stories of a thing that I know exactly how I got to the finished product. All right, Tom, thanks a lot.
Sounds good, Joe. Great to talk to you. Good luck with the podcast, and hopefully we can do some more of this.
All right. Mm-hmm. Talk to you soon.
All right, talk to you soon.
I have a fantastic guest coming up next week, and I believe I have another fantastic guest coming up after that. Can you imagine if I just said, I have a shitty guest that's coming up next week, so just skip it? No. The guest I'm going to be interviewing next week is an artist here in Charleston, and he is extremely talented, and we're going to get to know all about him. And so tune in next week to find out all about that. And with that, have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.